This strike is without doubt the most important dispute that our trade union movement has faced since the miners' strike in 1974.
Hey Robbie, where you going? In the middle of the night, I'm going down to London, to the bloody Cranwick site, where a wee small band of immigrants are fighting for their rights. So put your coat on, Jimmy lad, and come and join the fight. Hold the line, hold the line. We'll be there before the dawn to hold the picket line.
Mrs. Desai's legacy and message to us all is that ordinary people do extraordinary things.
It was quite shocking to see this short woman in a sari with a big loudspeaker, and hundreds of people sort of supporting her.
The dispute was completely unique, and her role was unique as well.
The trade union movement has been considered a white male preserve, and suddenly here was an assertive, confident Asian woman.
Not only was she a good trade unionist, in my opinion, she was a good human being.
My name is Jayaben, and I born in India. On the first day, when I came in England, is no good country. That's what my impression. I came in October. Leaf was fallen down and all the tree was black.
The first generation of Asian workers working over here was just feeding their feet. They didn't really know what health and safety legislation was, what a trade union was. A lot of employers employed Asian workers because they believed they wouldn't join trade unions.
Times were very hard for workers there, especially women who worked in factories. A lot of the successes of our community now are because of the struggles that a lot of people went through at that time.
It was well known in the area that Grunwick was a bad employer.
Very low wages, very poor working conditions.
Then as the newly arrived Gujaratis from East Africa came into Brent in very large numbers, the company, as a matter of deliberate policy, employed those workers and took advantage of those workers.
Work was not good, management was not properly. If you want to go toilet, then you have to take the permission of our people.
The way the workers were treated was absolutely appalling. They were treated like children who had to put their hands up to ask permission to go to the lavatory. People in charge of shifts who were forcing them to do overtime.
Overtime was compulsory, or you'd be sacked.
They were real bullies. And they would come in and they would look at you as if, you're nothing.
£28 and £30 is nothing in this time.
These were women that had been thrown out from Uganda, an African state that was then controlled by a dictator called Idi Amin, who was using the Asian population as a scapegoat for the problems in his country. The newspapers were playing up the immigration factor. All these Asians were coming into this country. In fact, they were British citizens. They were part of the British Empire originally, then the Commonwealth.
The same kind of threats that are taking place now against Eastern Europeans was really the threats that were taking place against Asian workers some 30 years ago. No doubt if we went back another 10 years beyond then, it was the West Indian workers that was coming over. If we went back another 10 years beyond then, would have been Irish workers.
As somebody who came from Irish parents, and I'll never forget my dad talking to me about the painful experience of trying to get lodgings in northwest London and seeing signs up which said, "No dogs, no Irish." That's what history tells us. Every wave of migration that comes to our shores sees migrant workers being exploited.
And they just pushed, and one day a woman called Jayaben Desai said, "You push no longer."
The Grunwick strike of the 1970s was really important. It was a seminal dispute of the 1970s.
The strike started in the postal department where Jayaben worked.
And I was talking to my husband at home, and he said that if you are in a union, it will not happen.
When the workers walked out, they weren't in a union. They went to the Citizens Advice Bureau.
Citizen Advice Bureau, they told us to go to the Brent Trade Council. Jack Dromey was that time the secretary of that Brent Council.
I met them within hours, I then became a member of the strike committee throughout the dispute.
And he said that you are the member of us now, and from now we will get together.
They joined a union called Apex. The moment they joined, they got strike pay. And that's what sustained the strike. They couldn't have sustained it without strike pay.
Usually a strike is a group of workers, an employer, have a dispute. This was different because you had an employer trying to get rid of people for joining a trade union, which they were wholly, legally and properly and correctly entitled to do.
The years running up to the dispute were grim years. In 1968, dockers and meat porters marched for Enoch Powell.
There'd been strike after strike after strike where actually the white trade unionists were often as much the enemy of the black workers as the management had been.
Workforces polarised along racial lines. Executives let down black workers.
Because they didn't see solidarity as something that they had to show. They saw black workers as a competition.
Suddenly, there was the biggest mobilisation in labour movement history in support of a handful of overwhelmingly Asian women.
I'm a union man, amazed at what I am. I say what I think, that the company stinks. Yes, I'm a union man. When we meet in the local hall, I'll be voting with them all. With a hell of a shout, it's out, brothers, out. And the rise of the factories fall. Oh, you don't get me, I'm part of the union. You don't get me, I'm part of the union. You don't get me, I'm part of the union. Till the day I die. Till the day I die.
The really significant thing for me was the first time that traditional white working class unions came together with a group of Asian workers trying to defend their rights and their jobs.
And it involves everybody. Because what we've had to do over the years, we've always had to fight for the conditions that we've got. And these people are doing the same, and we're there to support them.
The Grunwick strike put paid to the myth that black workers were depressing white workers' wages. Grunwick turned that on its head, because it was black workers who were actually fighting for the rights of all workers.
From now on in this country, the length and breadth of this land, whenever there's a trade union meeting and somebody talks about bloody blacks or backies undercutting the trade union movement, somebody else will say, what about Grunwick?
I've never seen such solidarity as I saw at the time of the Grunwick strike.
Workers coming to the defence of other workers in the form of supporting others is absolutely crucial. The trade union movement was built on solidarity.
It is always amazing when somebody you don't know has done something to support you. The post office workers quite spontaneously in that area said, we are not delivering the mail.
Before I was that impression that white people will not support us, but when I got the support of the white people, I feel that, oh no, I'm not alone.
They couldn't believe it. How could those guys who just deliver the mail support them in their strike? Change them forever, change the postman forever.
These were days of amazing sense of support and unity.
It was absolutely incredible being outside those gates at Grunwick.
So you had the very organised trade union delegations where the miners would come on a bus from Yorkshire.
You'd sort of come out of the tube station and there'd suddenly be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people on the street.
And then there were car workers that came from the Midlands.
Grunwicks have appealed for us to show solidarity, and therefore we've come down here today to indicate that we stand firmly with them.
Grunwick was actually a small factory in a residential area.
Local residents would come out, give us refreshments, give the women refreshments, support the picket line, and all this was at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Let's go down to Manchester, from Cardiff up to Crewe, from Brighton and from Liverpool, the word is going through. United we shall stand, but divided we shall fall. So get behind your banners bright and rally to the call.
The workers, they are the strength. And I saw that in this whole dispute, how tremendous strength they have.
I think Mrs. Desai leadership was fantastic. Here was the person that sort of come up to your hip that was fantastic in putting her point of view over.
I remember seeing her, and she was sort of 4 foot something in a sari with a big coat on, and she had this big megaphone.
In stature, very small Asian woman, very inspiring, very determined, and there's some wonderful photos of her standing up against a huge line of very big police officers. In those days there was a minimum height requirement for London police officers.
Hello, brothers and sisters. I'm so happy to see you in everybody. everybody in this big support. There is no doubt I can say that there's a victory is nearer.
She was always the person who said there's no barrier too great, no mountain too high that we can't climb.
Those images were extremely striking because we'd never seen them before. An Indian woman, a small Indian woman like that, leading such a massive national strike.
The reason why it all blew up on the picket line was there was a week where we'd arranged for 100 to be on the picket line each day in support of the strikers.
What you were trying to do was to stop the bus that was full of the scabs going into the gates of Grunwick.
We tried to lock out the scab workers that were being bussed in on a daily basis.
The police were there in numbers to stop that happening.
On the first day, the police arrested 84 of the 100.
I was dragged away for allegedly inciting the crowd and causing trouble.
Mass picketing doesn't mean violence. Mass picketing means that if the employer can move their capital and labour from one part of the globe to the other, then it's only right that you should be able to call upon as maximum amount of people to defend yourself as well.
Pickets were there to try and protect their jobs and try and get their union rights. When the scab vehicles came in, police cleared a path for them. That was the role of the police. Most police officers are working class lads. You say, well, what are you doing here? Why are you defending these people? I've been told to do it. I mean, well, that's not much of an answer, is it?
Now, the Special Patrol Group were formed in theory for counter-terrorist purposes. In practice, they came to be used increasingly against striking workers.
They've been deliberately ordered in by the Labour Home Secretary to use as much brute force and intimidation to stop people going to a future picket.
Some of my friends came back and I just remember being absolutely shocked. They were covered in blood.
In many ways it worked. It actually frightened people, terrified them. They were just saying, I've just come here on a demonstration and I've ended up with a broken leg.
This was a Labour government and they were absolutely terrified, if you like, by a show of workers' solidarity.
I think it's not worthwhile to depend on law. People saw on picket line, Grunwick picket line, on mass picket, the police brutality. You know, the government, they will use their power against workers to stop them.
The film that was shot there was shown to MPs in the House of Commons. It had no effect. They couldn't give a damn. They wanted that dispute over. They wanted it stopped. And if it took the brute force of the SPG that was subsequently disbanded when they murdered somebody, a protester in Southall, they used it.
It was the start of something that we saw for the next 10 years of a paramilitary policing with a devastating impact on industrial disputes.
And if you look at the film of the miners' strike a few years later, you'll see all those methods that were experimented on at Grunwick were carried out big time at Orgreave and other places. This dispute, small as it might appear, is so important and so seminal that if we win this one, we send a message to everybody else. Unfortunately, the history of trade union leaderships tends to be they want to cut a deal.
At that stage, it was an issue of huge public controversy and embarrassing to the then Labour government.
It used its influence over the trade union leadership in the TUC.
The TUC and the government panicked.
Stopped their strike pay if necessary, anything to get it off the streets.
Mrs. Desai and the others, they actually did a picket outside the TUC headquarters one day to actually show that they were now at loggerheads with the TUC leadership and that they felt sold down the river.
By that stage, the movement around the dispute had been run down and we were doomed to defeat.
Even though we had won the moral victory, the TUC failed by organising and mobilising the entire trade union movement and also the international trade union movement, which could have played a key role in winning the dispute.
The consequence, I would argue, of the demise of that strike, leading to the wider demise of the trade union movement, is most young people think trade unionism is an irrelevance, and that's a huge tragedy.
In the recession times that we're now in, we need to recapture the spirit of youth within the unions.
In the world of work, the balance of power between yourself and the employer is always going to be in favour of the employer. unless you become organised.
Even though the density of the trade union membership has considerably dropped, the reality is those unions that are fighting back, their membership is actually increasing.
This is my husband, and we are married since 55.
After all this fight, I'm not against union. Union should be there. I mean, if you have got a good, healthy cow, and if you keep on milking all the time, and not feeding the cow, what will happen? Disaster. The cow will die, and your milk will gone.
I think Jayaben Desai will be a figure in labour movement history, in the history of the Asian community, that will be remembered for centuries to come.
It changed the image of trade unionism forever. It had always been associated with a white male preserver. That had to go.
Up to that point, you'd have black people fighting and fighting and fighting for justice, and nobody would know about it. It wasn't even reported in national papers.
She started that. She made people think.
So it actually opened their eyes, I think, to the way racism worked within the class.
I think she was definitely a pioneer, and I think she changed the way people looked at Asian women, and particularly industrial relations, forever.
A picket line that I see once with tough Yorkshire miners of 6'4", weighing 24 stone, and she comes along of about 4'10" and 5 stone, and could hold the audience with all these people. And she really was the face of Brunswick.
All the people and all the women that I spoke to in the making of those films about did they have any regrets about spending 2 years standing on a picket line to belong to the trade union? No, they didn't.
She was placed in a situation where there was something fundamentally wrong going on. She tried to organise against it. It cost her her job, cost her personally and her family personally a huge amount. But she found it within herself to become the leader and the inspiration behind all that.